might be able to order a taxi via the Uber app. This is interesting. Let's look at this. I'm on the New York Times right now. As you can see right away, Uber's about to close a deal for a partnership with San Francisco taxi outfit. Passengers could soon use the Uber app to order taxis in a deal similar to one recently announced in New York City. So if it's happening in New York and San Francisco, this could be everywhere. The company is close to completing an agreement with a San Francisco partner, Flywheel Technologies, to allow Uber passengers in the city to call a taxi through the Uber app. The agreement, after a similar partnership between Uber and taxi companies in New York City was announced last week, would mark an abrupt departure from the years of fierce fighting between the two groups. I think this is super interesting. It kind of reminds me of the classic saying of, if you can't beat them, join them. And this almost seems like as if Netflix said, hey, you can now rent Blockbuster movies or rent movies on Blockbuster through Netflix. Kind of a similar concept in my opinion. But this is very, very interesting for numerous reasons. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I remember before Lyft and Uber came out, how hard it was to get a taxi. Gary Vaynerchuk, and this is all kind of relevant, I know this is kind of like a side note, but Gary Vaynerchuk, the famous entrepreneur, he said this, which always stuck out to me. He said, look, Uber is not necessarily a transportation app as we think of it. It's a time-saving app. I mean, when you order an Uber, you know exactly when it's going to pick you up. You can see it on the exact app where they are. You know exactly, you give them your location. You know exactly how you're going to get there. Everything's connected through the app. It's also cashless. It makes things a lot more easy and saves you a tremendous amount of time. I remember in Boston, before Uber and Lyft came out, getting a taxi was a nightmare. We'd get out at 2 a.m. at the bars on a Friday night, and I'm not exaggerating. Anyone who remembers this knows, it would sometimes take 2 hours just to get a taxi home and find one. Not even in terms of just like trying to find one, but we would find one, a group would come up, we'd start arguing about who was going to get in the taxi, people would start outbidding the taxi driver, being like, hey, if you pick us, we'll give you a $10 or $20 tip. It was ridiculous. It was the most annoying thing. And so the good thing about Lyft and Uber is there's so many drivers on the road, and it saves you a lot of time that you don't have to deal with when getting a taxi. However, I think a lot of times, especially now, people are saying, well, why take a Lyft and Uber when I can take a taxi? And if anything, especially with these surges of Lyft and Uber, and I know Lyft and Uber has gotten more expensive and it's not going to change, a lot of people are now taking taxis instead of Lyfts and Ubers. So I wonder if this is the perfect blend or duality where, let's say someone wants to take a taxi, they take a taxi like normal, they just order on the app, the taxi driver goes right there, boom, they pick them up. What I'm curious about is how is it going to affect the price, and how is this going to affect Uber drivers? Now, do I think it's going to be a huge detriment to Uber drivers? Definitely not. I don't think that's going to be an issue. What I am curious though is if, let's say I pull up the Uber app and it says you can take an Uber, then it's going to be $20. How much will that taxi be? Will they give me an estimate? 1. 2, if not, is there going to be a fluctuation where they'll give you maybe an estimate, or will they say, hey, you know what? We can't tell you anything. We're just going to say the Uber's $20 with the surge, but you can get a taxi, but you're kind of in the dark. It's almost going to be like a gamble. Like, I wonder if that's going to be the way the GUI runs, or the graphical user interface, where they don't give you a price estimate. They just say, look, no guarantees. We can't say anything either way. Just go for it. One of my friends just recently took a Lyft, actually, from the airport at LAX to her house, and she was telling me that it's a pretty short ride. I think it's like 3 or 4 miles from the airport or whatever, but we know airport rides usually pay a lot. She said because the surges were so high, it was minimum $50 just to get a Lyft or an Uber. She goes, this is ridiculous. Took a taxi, it was only $20. Like I said earlier, taxis have gotten so much more popular that what I'm also wondering is, a lot of people, at least when I first saw this, were like, oh, good for the taxi companies. Uber pretty much destroyed the taxi industry. Honestly, this is also a saving grace for Uber. I wouldn't be surprised if taxis are slowly making comeback, and I talked about that actually in a prior video, I think in like 2021 or something, that taxis were making comeback. Maybe this is Uber's way of subtly being like, shoot, we are losing some market share to taxis because a lot of people want to take them now. Why not make a mutual win-win with taxis? Taxis get more business through the Uber app, and for us, we maybe get a referral fee or some type of kickback from sending somebody a taxi or for making that connection. I actually think this is a really good idea. Overall, I think it's very interesting. Just the irony behind it, like I said, it'd be the same thing. I mean, actually, Netflix did do this, where Netflix made that documentary about Blockbuster. I saw a meme about that, actually, and it was something like, that's as if you killed somebody and then made a documentary about how you killed them. Kind of similar to with Netflix and Blockbuster, that situation. So it is the definition of irony, but maybe this is the best of both worlds. You can order an Uber if you want, take a traditional Uber, but if you don't want to, let's say the surges are too high, it's a win-win because the taxi drivers get business, and also for Uber, let's say they're like, shoot, no one's really ordering an Uber right now, the surges are aggressively high, we still get money coming in from referring people to a taxi. A very unique idea, but this makes me also think too, could this promote, especially in the long run, let's say this becomes a nationwide thing, at least at the time of this video, New York City and San Francisco are the two big cities doing this right now, or that they're going to do it. Could this be a nationwide thing? And let's be honest, if it's going well in these two cities, it probably will be just a standard feature. It's going to be very interesting, I think, overall, especially in the next year or the next 2 years to come, how this affects both the Uber driver and the taxi driver.